Atlanta. Here we are hosting the annual Chinese New Year Business Forum. The host organization is the World Trade Center Atlanta, the Carter Center, and the China Research Center. Our co-hosting organization is Dallas Sports ACP Foundation. First, I will introduce our CEO and the President of the World Trade Center Atlanta, Mr. Max Sussland. Give us welcome remarks. Max.
Good evening or good morning, wherever everyone is. But first off, I'd like to say, my name is Max Sutherland. I'm the President and CEO of the World Trade Center Atlanta. And I would like to wish everyone a happy Chinese New Year. A special thanks to the Carter Center, as well as the China Research Center to work with us on hosting again this year. This is an annual event for us, Julian, isn't it? I'm not sure how many years. It's my 4th year now.
No, probably we started since the first one since 2005, but in the middle we have some year we have break, so it's more than 10 years.
So we've had a number of years here celebrating the Chinese New Year, and we're always happy to do this. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Georgia Tech Cyber Center, as well as the Loyal Trust Bank. We couldn't put on these events without our sponsors, and so we thank you very much. The World Trade Center Atlanta, let me give you a little bit of an update on what we're doing. We have, as you can see here, I have behind me the World Trade Center Atlanta Academy. We have a new logo for just the Academy, but we launched the Academy the end of December, beginning of January. It's an international trade focused academy with our core program, which is global market entry. And it's on our website. If anybody's interested in checking that out, we're always more than welcome to share with others as well. We also are actively pursuing our real estate initiative. I actually had a couple of tours yesterday of buildings downtown with providing dedicated space as well to the World Trade Center Atlanta. So we're going to be creating an innovation and incubator center there. And we're hoping that we may have something signed by late summer, early fall for move-in by preferably August, September timeframe. We are also, if anybody's interested in going in as a cluster into a World Trade Center Atlanta branded building, reach out to me and let me know. You can also reach out to Julin, and he can forward any inquiries on to me. We have, because of the coronavirus, this past year, we've actually been able to focus a lot on new programming. We have our Global World Trade Centers Spotlight Series every month, featuring World Trade Centers from around the world. We have our Berkshire Hathaway Unico World Trade Center program, also every month, which highlights different markets from a business perspective as well as a relocation perspective. We have our monthly International Business Exchange as well as a monthly lunch with the president to talk about upcoming events and such. So do go onto our website. You'll see we've already listed quite a few of our upcoming events. But this, I don't want to take too much more time here because we want to talk about China. We want to talk about American-Chinese relations and opportunities for trade. So Julin, thank you once again for coordinating all of this, putting it all together. Again, thank you to the Carter Center and to the China Research Center. Thank you.
Okay, Max, thank you. Max, also I would add one more. The big event we're hosting annually for past 3 years, we're hosting World Trade Day, right?
Oh my God, yes.
Day, right.
Julin, thank you for reminding me about that. Yes, absolutely. Our signature event is coming up on Tuesday, May 4th. It's our World Trade Day Conference 2021. This year's theme is positioning for growth in the new global economy, staying relevant, connected, and ready. And we have a great keynote speaker from the Global Health Crisis Coordination Center, a division of the CDC, talking about the need to be ready around the world for any future pandemics and how companies are going to have to incorporate crisis and crisis recovery and disaster recovery plans into their strategies going forward.
All right. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Next, I will introduce our another hosting organization. Dr. Yawei Liu is the China Research Program Director in the Carter Center. So Yawei, can you go ahead and give a welcome address to the audience? Thank you.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Julie. So I'm Yawei Liu, the Senior Advisor on China at the Carter Center. So first of all, President Carter and Mrs. Carter extend Chinese New Year greeting to everyone that are attending this webinar, either from China or from the US or from other parts of the world. Secondly, when President Carter and Deng Xiaoping made the decision, the courageous decision to normalize relationship, President Carter was only 55 years old. So now this year he's 96, but he still cares deeply about China, about the Chinese people, and even more deeply about the relationship. The mission of the Carter Center is to wage peace. As long as US and China stay engaged, there will be peace. There has been peace in the past 40 years. There won't be peace if what happened in the last 2 years are going to be furthered. Lastly, engagement. To say engagement is a failure or fiasco, I think that's historically wrong, factually nonsense, and politically blind. For this world, and particularly for Asia Pacific region, to be peaceful and prosperous, which has been the case in the past 42 years, that is because of engagement. So US and China has to be engaged. And, Max talked about the World Trade Day, which is May 4th. That happens to be the Youth Day. And we're all young here, because we're all the generation of engagement, which began 50 years ago in 1971, but particularly of the last 4 decades. So today we have a great lineup of speakers. We started this webinar series a long time ago, but there's no more powerful lineup of speakers than it is today. I think if you look at the speakers today, we have 2 Americans who have close tie with China, spend a lot of time in China, either still working in China like Kerr, or is working on China-related matters like Frank on daily basis. We also have 2 Chinese speakers, who were born in China, got their initial education in China, but came here to the United States and became very successful. They are making contributions to the US as well as to the relationship. So this is the generation, what I mean, the generation of engagement. We're probably no less than the best generation of the World War II generation of the United States. They are the bridges between cultures, between histories, between 2 different political systems. They are the glue of this relationship that will not allow this relationship to come apart. And so that's why I think all of you who are here right now, we have 140, you're going to enjoy this webinar. You're going to learn a lot from our speakers. So now we'll go to our first speaker, Frank Neville, who started as a diplomat, who worked in Taiwan, in Chengdu, in Guatemala City, and finally in Beijing. After that, he resigned. I think he resigned. He's as one of the best foreign service officer under the age of 40 at the US State Department. He went to Arizona State. And then George Mason University, finally here at Georgia Tech as Chief of Staff to President Cabrera and Senior Vice President. Georgia Tech obviously is one of the most important research powerhouses here in the US. So without further ado, Frank, the floor is yours.
Sorry about that. It took me a minute to unmute myself. Thank you very much for the for the kind introduction. I want to thank the World Trade Center, the Carter Center, the China Research Center for inviting me to be here with you. I'm honored. There are many people on this call who know a tremendous amount about China, who have deep roots in China. And so I'm very honored to have the opportunity to talk with you and share a few of my ideas. But the first thing that I'd like to share with everybody is my New Year's greetings. I hope that your New Year is already off to a good start, and 恭喜发财 and 牛气冲天. And I hope all of you enjoy health and prosperity in the new year. So Yawei, thank you very much for your comments about engagement and the role of the Carter Center, because I think that's a great foundation on which to start the conversation tonight. It's not the foundation that I think most people are on right now. I think, as is no secret, there is a lot of controversy and tension and conflict in U.S.-China relations. And I think there is right now in Washington, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, sort of I don't know if it's confusion, but certainly a searching for answers and a sense that, past practices, past policies are no longer a guide for us going forward. But I do believe that, that engagement and a focus on common purpose and common benefit is the path that will take us forward. And so I'll come back to that in a little bit, specifically what I mean. But I want to lay out, I think it's important to, number one, be grounded in hope for the future, as we just heard from Yawei, but also be cognizant of reality and not be naive about where we are and the challenges that are currently facing us. And when I say us, I mean all of you who are involved in U.S.-China relations, U.S.-China commercial relations, or in my case, educational relations, or whatever other relationship you have with China. So all of us, I think, feel this tension between the growing importance of China globally and the need to engage, the importance of engagement, but also challenges that are being brought about by virtue of China's changing role in the world. And China is becoming very much more assertive in a lot of different dimensions. And I think it's challenging global norms. And I think that has unsettled people. And it's an unsettling thing for the relationship. So we now find ourselves, and this is very different than it was when I first became involved in China in 1989, when I joined the State Department. But we find ourselves in a situation where the United States and China are the two most powerful, most consequential nations in the world. And in 1989, I think we all saw that future, but now it's here, and we need to have the wisdom and the patience and the skill to be able to deal with what is a very new reality. And so I think what people are feeling on sort of an individual level, again, is a degree of uncertainty and frustration and concern. And again, in the spirit of sort of not being naive to the reality, there's a lot of frustration on the part of U.S. business about market access, about an unequal playing field within China. And China's been very forthright about an assertive industrial policy. And these things have unsettled the commercial relationship between our two nations and pose significant challenges for the path forward. U.S. workers concerned about lost jobs here in the United States due to China's success in exporting and particularly in the wake of the WTO accession about 20 years ago. But it's still a point of tension and concern, and we've seen that rumble through our political landscape here in the United States certainly over the past 5 years. There's a considerable concern among national security experts about how to engage with China, how to deal with China. Certainly events in the South China Sea or cybersecurity. All of these things are very concerning. And again, I feel like people have more questions than answers at this point. Human rights groups are very concerned about things such as the recent events in Hong Kong or what's going on in Xinjiang. And again, I think the old measures of dealing with those things, I think when viewed from policymakers or interested parties, particularly in Washington, no longer seem to be really applicable. So I think there's a growing and general consensus that the United States needs new thinking regarding its relationship with China. And I think we've seen some of that already, coming from Washington, the Biden administration, and I know all of you are following this very closely, so I know these things aren't, secrets to you, and I won't dwell on the details, but I think there are a couple things that are interesting. I mean, first of all, we've seen some tough signals, right? Some, a sense from the Biden administration that it will try to distinguish itself from the policies of the Obama administration. And I think that's to be expected. Biden was vice president under Obama, and, it would be easy to sort of assume that Biden will be what Obama was until proven otherwise. And so I think it was important for Biden to signal that, that he would take a different approach to China. And I think that was necessary because, to acknowledge that there's a pretty firm bipartisan consensus in support, of a more firm China policy. Maybe not the things that we've seen in recent years, with the trade war and some of the things that the Trump administration did, but definitely a general consensus that the United States needs to be more active in defending what people consider to be U.S. interests. I think the other thing we've seen, though, from the Biden administration, and I alluded to this just a second ago, is the sense that, a lot of the things that the Trump administration did on trade will not be continued under the Biden administration. So, we've details yet to be seen, but I think, those are two important signals. What we have not seen, I think this is interesting, or at least I haven't seen too much evidence of it, is a discussion over decoupling. In fact, President Biden has talked about intense competition, which I think is a nod to sort of the reality of the political climate currently in Washington. But I think trying to frame it in a way that provides for a more productive agenda, as opposed to confrontation or decoupling or some of these other words that have gotten tossed around in the past weeks, months, years. So let me, I'm going to offer a few thoughts on, how to go forward in this environment. And then I know we've got folks who are, subject matter experts and very knowledgeable about specific pieces of the relationship. So I won't get into, too much detail on each of these things. But before I do that, I'd like to sort of frame my comments. I think it's important, number one, to always be cognizant of your assumptions, but I think it's also helpful in terms of designing thoughtful and effective policies. And so a couple things that I've learned in 30 years of being involved in U.S.-China relations. And I'll go back to my first day on the job, which was June 4th, 1989. And so things changed on that day in the U.S.-China relationship, and we were thrown into a period of turmoil. And so my first years dealing with China were dealing with the fallout, the ramifications of that day, and then the U.S. reaction to that day. And when I was in the embassy working in China in the 90s, one of our jobs, in addition to sort of rebuilding bridges on the ground, was to go back to Washington and to explain to members of Congress, who were sort of the main, sort of political impediment to, at least from the executive branch's point of view, the main political impediment to engagement with China at that point, and explain to them how China was changing, and the things that were different in China in terms of openness or human rights or commerce or whatever it was. And we were met, by very, strong skepticism on the Hill, and it was a tough road, because there was the desire to punish China. There was the sense that China had a different political model that we didn't agree with, and so we should not engage. And so we talked past one another. And in retrospect, I think we were both wrong. And I think, today, in some respects, we're having that same discussion where we're sort of talking by one another. And even, within, Washington, we're taking positions that are extreme and not going to bring us to a consensus that helps actually move things forward. And let me give you a couple specific lessons that I've taken away from those early experiences, and then seeing this sort of debate repeat itself like a bad movie over and over and over. And I think the first takeaway was, the idea that China could be isolated or that its rise could be thwarted by strong U.S. pressure was clearly naive, right? What was happening in China was related to dynamics of Chinese society. Now, of course, the accession to the WTO, and I was a part of those, negotiations and process was obviously a choice on the part of the U.S. administration, but it was not a real choice that you could. It wasn't as much of a choice as it seemed. Like, China was heading in a direction where it was so connected, becoming more and more connected to the global economy, that bringing it in, to the WTO, yes, was a choice, but it was an eventuality that the United States could not really stop. So again, the idea that the United States could somehow stop or block or thwart China was naive, and that idea is still naive, and I think it still runs through some of our policy thinking, unfortunately. But the idea that Chinese development would automatically lead to a political model that looked like the United States, what we would call a liberal democratic model, was also naive. And I was one of the ones who probably believed more in that eventuality than the being able to block China eventuality. But I think in retrospect, again, what we misunderstood then, and I think in some cases we misunderstand now, is that China's development has its own internal dynamic, and external forces can maybe shape or adjust that, but cannot, significantly bend that trajectory. So I think then in thinking about what, can we do with China, or what should we do vis-a-vis China, is I think we need to drop this false dichotomy, of, we either need to stop China, or, we need to leave China alone because China will become, a Western liberal democracy if we just give it enough space. I think the past 30 years have proven that both of those views are wrong. So we're not going to ignore, isolate China. It's not North Korea or Cuba, but and decoupling. And there's been a lot of discussion on this. I won't delve into it, but decoupling would certainly hurt the U.S. economically and strategically. We've already seen some decoupling, and it's already, in my view, been to the detriment of the United States, both commercially and strategically. China has started to build its own, I won't call it a world order, but at least regional structures and alliances and supply chains and things of that nature. And the less the United States is a part of it, the more our interests, I think, are damaged. But at the same time, we can't require that China share American values as we see them as a precondition for engagement. Again, China is not going to become the United States, and I think U.S. policymakers and Americans more generally need to understand that. So I think the ultimate goal for the United States should be to find an acceptable, reasonable, realistic role for China in a rules-based global order. So what is that? And when I say acceptable, I mean, acceptable to the United States from the United States perspective. Not ideal, but again, acceptable. What is it that will allow the two largest countries in the world to have a mostly productive relationship and to, mostly provide benefits, through our collective leadership to the rest of the globe? So I'll offer my 8-point strategy for that. And it could have been a 6-point strategy or a 10-point strategy. And I'm sure you could, once I share these things with you, add or subtract your own. But since 8 is a lucky number, I'm going with 8. So number one is we need to put the U.S. House in order. And we've heard some talk about that in Washington. And just as China's source of global strength and global emergence was the result of changes happening domestically within China, so should the United States' global strength be grounded and emanate from domestic strength. The strength of our economy, the strength of our educational system, the strength of our technology, et cetera, et cetera. So number two is the United States needs to champion a rules-based international order. Again, as I mentioned, we can't stop China's emergence. We can't block China. We can't isolate China, but we can steer it through championing a rules-based international order. And I know that will be a little bit of a change from previous years where there was a lot of concern about the international order not serving U.S. interests. But this international order was largely built by the United States and was built, principally to serve American and Western European interests. And in my view, it still does that quite well. And we are better served strengthening the order, updating the order, than stepping outside the order. Third is, I think we need to rebuild alliances with like-minded nations. And I think, we've seen traditional American allies head in different directions, vis-a-vis China policy. But I think there is strength in numbers, and this will definitely help us, shape the rules-based order if we have allies who are working in concert, maybe not on every particular thing, but with a general shared interest in creating in strengthening international institutions, and by building international cooperation that steers China towards, again, outcomes that we believe are more in the interest of a stable long-term relationship. The fourth issue is we need to live up to our values. And for those of you who remember Tiananmen, you'll remember that there was a makeshift Statue of Liberty built in Tiananmen Square. Fast forward 30 years, and the Chinese people do not see the US as a model to emulate. And I think that is largely our fault. And I think that the values upon which this country was built, the values that have, served this country well in times of crisis, and the values that made the United States a model for others are ones that we need to embrace. It will strengthen our leadership. It will not erode our power. Fifth thing is, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but be realistic about what we think China will and will not do in response to outside influence. Again, China's dynamics are domestic dynamics, and there are things that are core to Chinese interests that will not bend to outside pressure. Just like there are things that in the United States that are core interests that will not bend to outside pressure. So we need to be realistic and not naive about what China will and will not be. So then sixth, I think we need to compete hard where our interests are really at stake. And I'm encouraged by Biden's choice of intense competition. And I hope that gains traction, and I hope that helps to frame both the reality but also the hope, and also to center the thinking of American policymakers and others here in the United States in terms of what it is that we need to do to deal with all of these U.S.-China issues that have caused so many concerns. And I think, and I know we're going to hear more about this in a little bit from some of our other speakers, I think, but I think we need to win at technology. And winning at technology, I think, requires a different approach in terms of the public-private division of labor. And even in a U.S. model, of sort of individual responsibility and somewhat limited government, there are public goods that government needs to invest in, and I think we have lagged in investing. And things like basic research, things like education, things like infrastructure. Also things, going further, I would add, primary healthcare, public health, as we've seen in the past year, and then inequality. I think, having a society where some people are providing, fewer and fewer contributions to economic activity, and there's an increasing inequality of wealth distribution, does not serve our interest well. If you're a sports team and 30% of your players can't play, you're not going to be a very competitive sports team. And similarly with a nation, if you have large segments of your population who just by virtue of their birth are destined to, unproductive economic lives, leave out all of the other, suffering, you are holding yourself back as a nation. So I think all of those things government needs to invest in those basic things so that we have a strong base, not just in technology, but that's an area where I think it is most obvious and most urgent. Seventh thing is, separate issues where we can and link them where we must. I think in my 30 years of watching U.S.-China relations, I think trying to link issues we've sometimes linked too many things and gotten ourselves in dead ends where we couldn't, reach agreements. Because I think we always assumed that negotiations were a zero-sum game. And if any of you who has studied or taught negotiation knows that, in zero-sum games, you better be considerably stronger and better than your opponent in order to win consistently. And I think if we take a zero-sum approach against China, which is a very powerful nation in so many dimensions, the likelihood that we are going to end up with significant net benefits is highly, highly naive in my view. So I think being smarter about how we connect issues and being more thoughtful about how we negotiate is important. And then finally, I think it's be practical and focus on outcomes. The more we can, all of us, tone down political rhetoric and focus on tangible things that really matter, I think all of us will be better off. So hopefully that provides at least the framework, the starting point for a discussion. Hopefully that provides a realistic yet hopeful view of the path forward. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing others' thoughts.
Thanks, Frank. That was a great overview of the relationship and also your 8-point recommendation in terms of how to manage this relationship, productively. Our next speaker hails from Shanghai. He went to UCLA and then to Berkeley. He went to China, I think as early as in 1985. That's before I came to the States. But he was involved with Boston Consulting Group, with Apple, with Disney, with HSBC. All the legendary Western companies that are doing very well in China. He liked China so much that he moved to China in 2002. And so he's the president of AmCham, American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, is one of the oldest. I think it was established in Shanghai during World War I. That actually highlights, the centrality of China in the American thinking. So without further ado, Kerr, reporting from the front line of U.S.-China relationship, where it all began back in February 1971. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. The Shanghai Communique. 1971. So thank you very much, Yawei, and Julian, and everybody. I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor to be invited to speak to this group. I've been looking forward to this discussion. It's helpful for me to link to people in the United States, and I'm eager to get to the Q&A session so I can learn much more about what's on your mind and what people are thinking about China these days. First, and also, a shout out and thank you to the World Trade Center and also to the China Research Center, but most importantly to the Carter Center and the Carter Center. I mean, it's very important and appropriate that they're hosting this at this particular time. I mean, it is President Carter's role in this is well known, and I think we could we could dedicate an entire session or multiple sessions just to talk about the benefits to having established and normalized relations as he did in 1979, and how many good things that has resulted in for both the people of China and the people of the United States. So we could dedicate a lot of time to that discussion, but let us just leave it there. I think it's also appropriate to point out that Carter, as a Democratic president, was really finishing the work that was started by a Republican president. So it was Republican Richard Nixon that actually got those discussions started in 1971. And again, this is the 50-year anniversary, by the way, of ping pong diplomacy, for those of us who remember that. But again, we can get into more discussion about that later. Which will be celebrated here in Shanghai, by the way. We've already been contacted to have a little ping pong tournament between Americans and Chinese, just for fun. And I think it'll hopefully lighten the mood and help us all remember the positive sides of the relationship and focus less on the negative. The second thing I want to do before we get started into remarks is, I do want to congratulate the state of Georgia. I know that there are a lot of people on this call that are from Georgia and also not from Georgia, but I just do want to say that, and this is connected to Frank's comments in the keynote about American values. And as Americans living overseas, we do see it as part of our role is to promote and to celebrate American values and what's best in America. And I would agree with Frank that these days we're not showing our best side, but the good citizens of Georgia, under enormous pressure and under the microscope of the world, with the world watching, conducted a peaceful transition of power and executed an election in accordance with the law. So as Americans overseas, we want to congratulate you on that. So Georgia, you very much made us proud. And that segues into just a very brief introduction of the American Chamber of Commerce and who we are and what we do. We are nonpartisan, so we represent. We're a non-government and nonpartisan, a nonprofit organization. So now you know what we are not. What we are is an organization of about 3,000 members. We represent most of the Fortune 500 companies that have operations here in China. But we also have a large number of small and medium enterprises as well, and I'll come back to that in a second. But it's pretty much our role to interact with both governments, the Chinese side government as well as the United States government, and promote a positive commercial relationship between the United States and China. So in that spirit, I'll just make a few remarks about that. And again, staying within the commercial lane, if you will. There's so many other aspects of the relationship, but I'll focus my remarks just on the commercial. And so Frank had eight categories. I'm going to narrow mine to 3. So I'm going to just make a few brief remarks around 3 specific categories. One is U.S. policy, China policy. Make a couple of remarks about that and the Biden administration and our reaction to the new administration. Second, I'll talk a little bit about the market conditions, especially COVID recovery, GDP. And then third, if there's time, I know Yahweh and Julian, I'm sure you'll keep me on track here, but talk a little bit about the opportunities and threats from a business point of view that we see, and we'll see how far we get. First, on U.S. policy towards China and on trade, what we think the issues are going forward. First of all, American Chamber of Commerce, we do an annual survey with a lot of data that collects a lot of data on what the American business community is thinking, and it has a lot of good data on profitability, revenue growth, which sectors are expanding, what's not, and basically what's on the mind of American CEOs that are operating here in China. So we publish this every year. Anybody who wants a copy of it, please just contact me later, and I'd be glad to share an electronic version with you. But one of the questions that we ask is, what's number one on your mind in terms of looking out 5 years, and what are you concerned about with respect to your operations here in China? And, is it domestic competition? Is it regulatory transparency? Is it intellectual property theft, currency manipulation? What is it? And this past year, by far, the number one concern is the tension in the relationship itself. American CEOs over here are looking at the dialogue and the vocabulary being used between Washington, D.C. and Beijing, and we are horrified. It makes people here nervous, and nobody has been happy about it. Overall, another question that we ask is the overall optimism level. Are you fundamentally optimistic or pessimistic about your business as it operates here in China? And that has typically been around sort of 70 to 80% level. Our members are fundamentally fairly optimistic. In the first year of the trade war, that number plummeted. So we dropped more than 20 points in terms of the optimism level through the trade war. We did, however, put out a flash survey immediately after the election, and that optimism level was much higher. So people do feel that while anecdotally we'd ask, and I saw that in the chat room, there's some questions about the Trump administration's approach, and I'll save that for Q&A. I'll be happy to address that question. But while there's a fair bit of agreement in terms of how Trump addressed China, there's more optimism under a Biden administration in terms of getting this relationship back on track. Having said that, not to be the pessimist here, but there is cause for concern about how that is going to play out. And I'm a little bit concerned that my members may be overly optimistic in some sense. And so one issue is that while the Trump administration focused very specifically just on trade and left other issues to the side, there's indications that the Biden administration will not be doing that, and they will be bringing in additional issues like the human rights issues in Xinjiang, democracy issues in Hong Kong. That's going to complicate the relationship significantly. Maybe optimistic on trade, pessimistic in terms of the challenges that we have going forward. Having said that, our early assessment, in terms of the team that he's putting together is very impressive team. Tony Blinken, Catherine Tai, Kurt Campbell. These are probably the three that we're focused on most as people we expect to really be driving policy. These are people we know very well, either by reputation or having interacted with them ourselves. So we have a great deal of confidence that this is the right team to help figure this out. A couple of reactions, and Frank, I think, put down the framework very, very, very well and talked about how the Biden administration might approach this. Already we've seen a difference in tone, even though there have been two very difficult conversations between the administration and China. So Tony Blinken with his meeting, his telephone conversation with Yang Jiechi, and then of course President Xi and Biden had their call. Both calls were difficult. There's no question about it. But we're hearing that the tone is back to much more of a mutually respectful conversation that can take place, even though the issues are going to be difficult. So we can come back and talk more about that, but I'll just make one comment about some of the things we're observing in terms of the signaling of what the Biden administration is going to focus on. And there've been, it's quite clear that they're going to that the Biden administration will put the American worker front and center. And we in the American business community here in China, we see that as a good thing and entirely appropriate. And it is not inconsistent with the idea that there should be a very robust footprint for American businesses here in China. So in other words, we've very much resisted this idea that the American businesses here in China are taking away jobs in the U.S. or much more that if we exit the China market for whatever reason, that this would somehow result in an increase in jobs in the United States. We find that that is a false narrative. It is a false equation. I think most of the people on this call would understand clearly that the structure of American business that's operating in China is not a structure that is closing factories in the United States and shifting business to China. That model is really the old model and is not realistic today. In fact, the opposite is really true. We feel very strongly that as American businesses see revenue expansion and profitability here in the China market, that business actually supports jobs in the headquarters in the United States in terms of the sales that are generated here need to be supported by R&D, design, accounting, finance functions in the United States. And we have members who can point very specifically to jobs in the U.S. that are dedicated to supporting their business in China. So we feel very strongly about that. And again, we welcome the idea that the American worker should be front and center as the United States negotiates trade deals and improves its relationships with markets overseas. Having said that, I just do want to say a quick word that AmCham is actually working on a program that will help small, medium enterprises to generate sales, generate business in the China market. And again, if anybody is interested in that, to contact me later and be happy to connect you with that program. And the idea there is to help American exports and hopefully support the creation or saving a few jobs in the United States as the U.S. goes through its recovery. And that brings me to the second category. I think there's a lot more to talk about within the policy framework. Again, Frank touched on decoupling and the technology stack, and I think there's a lot to discuss there. But I'll go to the second main category of comments that I'm making, just sort of the overall China market conditions and what it looks like over here as we go through the COVID recovery and sort of GDP growth. The net here is that the China market and the China economy is fully open for business at this point. It's quite remarkable, in fact, how quickly China has recovered. Again, we could spend a lot of time talking about the response of both countries, frankly, in the early parts of the pandemic, meaning for China, that would have been, the November, December, and early January timeframe. Likewise, I think the United States is open for criticism in terms of what happened in the January, February, early March timeframe in terms of the early response to the pandemic. But in terms of the later responses, in terms of the managing the lockdowns, managing the reopening, and managing an ongoing response to the pandemic, China's performance in this regard has been remarkable. The way they've executed, the temperature checks, mask wearing, contact tracing, quick, rapid testing. It is a model that no matter how you feel about China, this is the proper way to execute public health, and that has had a direct impact on the economy. So, looking at 2020 GDP, China was about 2% growth. Now that was on earlier expectations pre-COVID of about 6% GDP growth in 2020. Our businesses, again, we did survey them to ask about their business, the revenue impact of COVID, and again, 2020 was not as bad as it could have been, put it that way. So many of our businesses still got to revenue growth that's close to what they originally planned for. Certain businesses, of course, have not recovered in quite the same way. Obviously, travel and leisure still suffering. As one of our members is Disney. Obviously, Disney theme parks. Social distancing, not exactly conducive to their business, and some of the hotels as well, and airlines clearly. But other businesses are actually doing quite well. 2021 GDP growth figures, we're expecting the sort of consensus estimate around GDP for 2021 is between 7.5 and 9% on the high end. The IMF, I think, is somewhere in the middle there, around just below 8%. And again, those numbers are borne out by our members. They do look at revenue expansion in 2021. This is going to be a strong year for the Chinese economy. Certain sectors, in particular, I mean, the consumer market very strong, retail strong, food products, and healthcare for sure. Are all doing extremely well. So the bottom line there is the overall economy has demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, and most importantly, speed. The speed of the recovery, and that just brings me to just talk about the third category of comments, and just talking about sort of opportunities and threats, and what everybody, you all as business people, should be thinking about when you look at China, and things to be aware of. I'd say, overall, the message is that the China market is attractive. It is welcoming to American brands and products and services and technology. This is a pro-business environment and very much open for investment, provided you are selling something that China wants to buy. And again, I think this relates to Frank's comments about the political and economic system. It's simply a reality that this is a very different market. Facebook and Twitter will never have a business in China. It's just and no matter how many phases of trade deals we have, no matter what is happening, it's not going to happen. So that's just something that we need to understand and frankly accept. We do point it out often, in terms of within the context of reciprocity, the idea that those similar businesses are free to operate in the China market, in the U.S. market. So in other words, the Chinese internet companies and media companies are free to operate in the U.S., but our sort of American champions, if you will, are still restricted in China. Data centers, cloud computing, all of these kinds of businesses are still going to be challenging for wholly owned American businesses. Now, having said that, so it's an attractive market, but we do need to be prepared. So people looking at the China market, need to recognize that the domestic competition is extremely robust. So the days when you could kind of bring a product over here, and no matter what it was, the Chinese market would absorb it. These days we compete head to head in a very specific way. I mean, take Tesla. Tesla's very successful business here in China, but there are almost 200 electric vehicle companies operating here in China. I was just having dinner last night with one of the big automotive OEMs, and she said that they attract no fewer than 20 companies specific in the EV space that they need to be concerned about. So we need to be prepared to compete. And number two is we need to be prepared for China's speed. In other words, everything here operates much faster. China has very much adopted the sort of Silicon Valley, if you will, idea of fail fast, and that's how things operate. The Chinese consumers are very demanding, and they are not patient. So things need to operate very, very quickly. And third and lastly, I'll say, and it's the digital aspect. We need to be prepared for. China has adopted digital technologies, e-commerce, and delivery. There is an army of people. They call them out here. They call them 小哥, and it's an army of people that do nothing but deliver things to homes. And so the point here is that, and again, I think this fits very well with Frank's comments about framework. We need to be ready to compete as the United States, and we need to invest more in digital. We are behind. I come from Silicon Valley. I grew up in the United States, so I'm in a good position to sort of compare what's happening in the U.S. and what's happening in China. China is exceeding our capabilities, believe it or not, even though Silicon Valley is one that could be on the forefront, I think, of innovation and technology development. But in terms of implementing electronic currency, digital payments, these kinds of things, it's quite remarkable. So lastly, just in closing, I would say that, despite everything that's happened in the last 4 years, the reservoir of goodwill towards America and American brands is still there. So there are opportunities here in China, but we do need to accept China the way it is, and understand that while China is changing constantly, it's going to change on its own terms and according to its own needs. And I couldn't agree more strongly with some of Frank's comments regarding that. Is the idea that China, it was or certainly is now, going to just sort of naturally either copy the U.S. model or just naturally evolve much more towards a Western style democracy. That idea is clearly absurd, and so I think our choices are more narrow. I think we have to accept China the way it is, and then decide how we are going to react, both from a commercial point of view and a geopolitical one.
Thank you.
So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. We got
and back to
next
Julie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yawei, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kerr, for that very exciting report from the front lines of U.S.-China commercial relationship. Our next speaker is Scott in New York. I never realized the World Trade Center Association is all over major cities in the U.S. and also all over the world. And Scott Wang has worked in this apparatus since 2002. The equivalent of World Trade Center Association in China would be Mao Zuhui. So he's the vice president, and in China's context, he's the vice minister speaking to you guys. All right, Scott, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Yawei, for the introduction, and Jilin for the invitation to join today's panel. And because you mentioned WTCA, World Trade Center, and our presence, it was actually, I only realized that this global presence after I joined this association, starting from my work with WTC San Diego in 2002, as Yawei put it. But to get started, I wanted to thank WTC Atlanta, the Carter Center, and the Chinese Research Center for hosting such a wonderful event. I'm honored to join today's discussion on this very, very relevant topic on U.S.-China relations. And also, I would like to say Happy Chinese New Year to all of our fellow speakers and attendees today. U.S. and China are two of the largest regional networks in the World Trade Center Association, which I have had the privilege to serve. Together, they account for roughly a quarter of our global membership base, consisting of 320 World Trade Centers. In the past decades, we have worked closely with public and private sector in both countries to promote trade and investment opportunities and to serve local business communities through our WTCs. As Yawei mentioned, that some of our WTCs in China, actually 8 of them, and all in major Chinese cities, they're owned by local CCPIT sub-council. So together, we offer a wide range of trade and investment facility and services to provide companies with critical information, communication, and connection for them to succeed in the global marketplace. And today's event is a perfect showcase of what we do as a global network. So we are very proud of the benefits of trade brought to both countries. For China particularly, as my fellow speakers mentioned, we witnessed a historic development to prosperity, which lifted 750 million people more than a half of the Chinese population out of poverty in the past 40 years, which is truly remarkable. At the same time, we also witnessed the fluctuation, frustration, and tension between the two countries during the course. I believe most of us can agree that the past couple of years were probably the most difficult period since President Nixon's visit to China to open the door in 1972 and the normalization of relationship by President Carter in 1979. It started with a trade war and followed up with a major deterioration, at times confrontation in other aspects of bilateral relation during the COVID-19 pandemic. As the trade tension between the two countries escalated, we saw how badly hundreds and thousands of companies, and many of them served by our local WTCs, especially SMEs, struggled. Not only those in the two countries, but also in other regions due to the disruption and sometimes distortion to market and supply chain. We are a membership organization, so one of our keywords, actually mentioned by Frank and Kurt earlier, is always engagement. Essentially, this is to manage a relationship. In the case of US and China, I think everybody agree this is one of the most important and consequential bilateral relationships in the world. And the current status is far from satisfaction. With the new US administration in charge, there has been hope from both sides of the Pacific that the US-China can re-engage each other in a more constructive and effective way to manage disputes for the sake of the two countries and also the world. But the question is how to. As Frank mentioned, that we have, the United States have a major policy dilemma, and it's still in the process of to develop and identify a new China strategy. And I personally, believe this is one of the largest challenges, and also maybe the largest opportunities for US-China relation, which we're discussing today. China, of course, is trying to put some pressure on US by publicly calling for a reset of the relationship, while the Biden administration was asking for patience in order to strengthen US amid pandemic and other compelling domestic issues. At the same time, US intends to work with allies for coordination on China policy, which will take some time. However, President Biden and President Xi did manage to talk at the Chinese New Year's Eve. The tension was still there based on the official White House announcement after the call, which surprised nobody. But the call did improve the atmosphere. I agree with Kurt. So it was encouraging to see the least. Nevertheless, trade has been and remains as one of the core areas of the bilateral relation and a potential source of tension between the two countries, with nagging issues such as subsidies to SOEs, industrial policy, intellectual property protection, forced technology transfer, labor rights, market access, trade imbalance, and so on and so forth. This has been a tough issue, actually, which resulted in the so-called trade war under the Trump administration. However, I'm actually cautiously optimistic that trade might become an area for the two sides to strike earlier progress and gain common ground if compelling to other areas such as security, human rights, cyber espionage, etc., which are more contentious. My assessment was based on some recent developments and encouraging signs, especially from the China side. First, China made major headways in multilateral and bilateral trade and investment agreements late last year. In November 2020, China signed a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP agreement with 14 other countries in Asia-Pacific region after 8 years of negotiation. which resulted in the formation of what is largest trading bloc of 30% of global GDP and 30% of global population. It was followed by the China and the EU Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, or CAI, which was concluded right before the new year of 2021. Some people questioned the timing and the geopolitical motive as they were right before the inauguration of Biden administration. But treaties like this will for sure boost the international trade and investment for the region and the world. It was also a good sign of China's willingness of role playing. This is one of the core appeals from the United States. Second, China demonstrated openness to discuss and address some of the most challenging issues, such as SOE, subsidies, labor rights, forced technology transfer, etc. Actually, if you look at the EU-China investment agreement, actually it touched all of these issues to a certain extent. In addition, five days after the signing of RCEP, President Xi announced China's interest in a membership of another major FTA, the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, which was originally proposed by the United States under the name of Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Although CPTPP is not the same thing as TPP, it is still considered as the highest level of FTA, which mostly comply with US trade regulations and policy, and impose strict requirements on things like SOE subsidies and labor rights. Despite it was labeled as anti-China, China's interest in TPP was demonstrated as early as 2013 by Premier Li Keqiang and other senior officials. It was quite clear that China hoped to leverage CPTPP process to stimulate higher level of economic development of China, as did by China's WTO accession. So I personally do think that this, when we're talking about role playing, role setting, that China is still in the process in its rise, and there is a tremendous learning curve. It's going slow. That there is still a hope. I think that the U.S. and China can really engage and integrate in the global partnership. I will go back to what Frank mentioned, that it's sort of a steer China that this international regime. And for example, in the case of this CPTPP, I think one of the biggest thing behind this drive is probably this SOE reform in China, which has been slow moving to date. I believe China hope that this CPTPP process can really generate some of new momentum for this. Of course, it is probably going to be a long way for China to get there in terms of CPTPP membership, but the interest does seem to be genuine. Third, China renewed its full commitment to U.S.-China Phase 1 trade agreement after the November election by Foreign Minister Wang Yi in one of the video conference call with the U.S.-China Business Council. The Phase 1 trade agreement was made only last year as a way to de-escalate the trade war. The focus was to increase China's purchase of U.S. goods and service, especially agricultural products. It also covers other areas which are more structural by nature, such as intellectual property, technology transfer, access for financial service, etc. Despite the missing of purchasing target for fourth year due to pandemic and other causes, the overall progress was good, including those in structural areas. Currently, the Biden administration indicated it would keep the Phase 1 agreement for now for further evaluation, and there is no discussion of Phase 2 at this point. While we understand it is unlikely that the U.S. could go back into the negotiation table of CPTPP anytime soon, the possibility is there and real for the U.S. to build on the momentum of Phase 1 and other developments for Phase 2 trade agreement, which can address many, if not all, of the structural issues with a measurable enforcement mechanism with China. It could be a win-win for people and business communities in both countries and the whole world. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott, for your highlight of the trade relationship. Our last speaker, I feel connected with Bin because he went to college in the same city I went to the college, although he went to a much better university, Xi'an University of Electronic Science and Technology. Also connected because he came down here to the south, to Clemson University, to get his master's degree. But after that, he's on the rocket, finally ended up as the senior executive vice president of Texas Instruments. I felt lucky. I lived in 2 countries, but Bin lived in 4. So China, US, Canada, and Italy. So Bin, please tell us your story and how it is related to the relationship and how decoupling is going to hurt all of us.
Yawei, thank you for your introduction. Again, it's my pleasure to join this Chinese New Year Forum and thank WTCA and Carter Center for inviting me to be here. As Yawei mentioned, personally, I'm the beneficiary for the China to open to the world. I got the opportunity to learn not only the technology, but also the management and more importantly, the cultural differences. So I guess in the past year, it's been a pretty challenging year. And the good news is 2020 is behind us and 2021 is the year of the ox, supposedly to be a solid and a good year for the business. So here I just want to wish everyone and your family a prosperous and healthy year of the 2021. So looking back to the 2020, I guess there's no doubt that 2020 may be a transformation year of the 21st century, not only because of the COVID, but also because of many events, both here in the States and globally. Think about it, it's pretty much like the opening of a tale of 2 cities. It was the best of the times and it was the worst of times. Similarly, we can apply that to the relationship between the United States and China, which is the most important bilateral relationship in the world that will shape the future of the world and presents both challenges and opportunities, like many guests have been mentioned so far. So being a business person in high tech, I have had the opportunity to live in many different countries and have witnessed the growth of the business and technology in China, and also have seen what's happening here in the States, I would say the engine of innovation. Since I was in charge of the sales and marketing team of the Texas Instruments global team, I got the opportunity to visit hundreds of different customers in the States, China, Japan, EMEA, talking to many CTOs, talking to many design engineers, first-line design engineers, gained many first-hand experience about what is going on from an innovation perspective and what happens in different countries and the culture difference, the organization difference impacts. And interestingly, when I was traveling, I was asked by many people outside of China, in the US, in Europe, asking about, will China surpass US from innovation perspective anytime soon? And I just want to take this opportunity to share some of my points. First, United States is still the leader in innovation in the world with a big scale and big market. No country or region will be able to surpass it in a foreseeable future. Okay, that's point 1, which I will elaborate a little bit later. Second, China has been doing a great job on technology sector and is catching up, while still a long way to go. The third point I want to share today is decoupling is not a solution, like many people have mentioned. From business or from technology perspective, US and China need each other. We need both countries to work smartly, come out a solution. I guess that's for the politician, economist, academic, and also business people. So I will spend a couple of minutes to elaborate those points, a little bit more details. First, talking about the US leadership in the high-tech field. Many people would think about companies, when we talk about high-tech or innovation, we think about companies like Google, Amazon, Tesla, Apple, you name it. Well, there's nothing wrong about it. The roles those companies have played, the advancement they have brought into our technology or impact on our daily lives. Fact of the matter is, when we talk about innovation for a company or for a country, it goes way beyond those just a few companies and to be a leader in the world. Here, just find a couple of data points why I think US is leading. First one, the R&D expenditure, which is a good reflection of a nation's commitment to expanding capability in science technology, which in turn will drive innovation. So far, the US is ranked first in the world in public and private expenditures on R&D, spending about $500 billion in 2017. I think that's the 2017 data. And compared with China, which has been growing dramatically at about $450 billion. So worth mentioning is this number has been doubled in the past 5-6 years. So China is catching up rapidly. So it's very interesting to see how this is evolves. The second, another measurement or indicator is a venture capital spending. We all know, or most people know, venture capital has played a critical role in all of those companies we just mentioned when they were small. Apple, Intel, Microsoft, Google. The US has attracted the most investment, nearly $70 billion, according to the report, which is about half of global venture capital share. With the second player is China. So China is about 26% of the total venture capital and growing rapidly. The third indicator is higher education. I think Frank mentioned that. Frank mentioned this higher education because personally, I think higher education provides advanced work skills needed in knowledge-intensive global economy, especially in the high tech. American universities are the best in the world. According to Times Higher Education's 2020 rankings, the United States is home to 40 of the global top 100 universities. And US awarded the largest number of science and engineering doctorate degrees, about 40,000, which is ahead of any country. Interestingly, again, followed by China, which is about 34,000 PhDs. So clearly, American is leading on the higher education side. Of course, if you go down, when you check out the bachelor degree, engineering degree, I guess no surprise, India is leading the way, followed by the China. So that says the talent, where the talent is, especially for the electronics or high-tech industry. Worth mentioning, one more thing or several more things, it contributes to the leadership of the US in the high-tech field. One is an intangible one, which is a cultural attitude. Perhaps because of a long history of individualism and entrepreneurship, innovation is a key feature of the American spirit. Can-do attitude is a backbone of high-tech startups, meaning to be a leader in the high-tech field, this kind of can-do attitude, it plays an enormous role. Well, check out the number. Well, US, I guess, is only about 4% of the world's population, but are responsible for about 22% of global patent applications. And also China is about 20-something% global applications last year, which was growing from a single digit just 10 years ago. And one more thing, I think make US as a leader in this field is unbiased focus on productivity improvement or management effectiveness and pursuit of ROI. Well, sometimes I would say too much pursuing on ROI may hurt R&D spendings. I've seen many companies have been running this kind of challenges, especially when they are pushed to focus on the short-term returns, short-term measurements. But nevertheless, when I visited different companies or customers globally, the US is the only country at this scale who are almost more than half of the companies focusing on pushing the productivity improvements and focus on how to run the company more effectively. I can say even relentlessly. Versus some other companies, taking China, for example, only the top tier companies are operating at this level. Majority of our other companies are still at a very low level, I would say, even for some European countries. So I would say Americans have been doing a pretty good job on many fronts. Taking a semiconductor industry, which I'm familiar with, for example, the US semiconductor industry is a major engine for US economic growth and job creation in the past half a century. When we talked about some technologies back to 1960s, mainframe computers, 1980s, a PC, or 1995, the internet, or the smartphone, the semiconductor industry has been the backbone or the foundation for all those technologies. And looking into the future in coming 5-10 years, 5G, AI, healthcare, new energy, semiconductor industry will keep playing a key role. According to IDC forecast, by 2024, the total market will be about $500 billion business. And by the year 2030, the semiconductor industry will become a $1 trillion business sector, driven by the 5G and AI and smart or the IoT industries. So I guess I just want to highlight the US is undisputable global leaders in semiconductor and have, I think, 47% share measured by the sales, followed by Korea, and China is only 5% according to the 2019 numbers, but growing fast. Those said, US has its own challenges in semiconductor industry, ranging from manufacturing capability. For example, US manufactures about 30-something%, close to 40% in 1990 of global output of the semiconductor industry, and now only 12-13%. And also the investment from public sectors on the R&D on semiconductor has been flat in past 30 years in terms of a percentage of GDP. Also has the challenges on the talent side, because if you think about, many people here have the kids. When you go to the school, how many students, young kids have interest in STEM? I think that's a challenge. And also, of course, we're facing a competition from other countries, China included, European countries included. So long story short, I think the US still the leader with a lot of opportunities. And as long as a country, the US doing right things, the US will be able to keep the momentum and keep the leadership in years to come. Now moving the gears to talk about China. Needless to say, China has come a long way to get where it is today in terms of innovation. It's not happening overnight. It's rather a result of a well-defined long-term plan, a sizable and hyper-competitive domestic market. I think Kerr just mentioned that, and a large pool of skilled talents with strong work ethics, and many other factors that have made technology breakthrough possible. I think according to the 2020's edition of the Global Innovation Index report, which gauges the level of nation innovation in 130 countries based on more than 80 different indicators. China maintains the overall ranking at number 14 and is the number 1 among upper middle income countries. And according to this year's GI report, China was a main driver for a record increase in intellectual property filing in 2016. I just take a pause here. This is an IP or patent filing, okay? So what many different countries or have been working on the IP, China clearly is realizing the importance of patent and IP protection, even though it's still a long way to go. The country has also been leading investors in autonomous driving vehicles, education technology, virtual reality, and needless to say, is mobile payment, which has the largest share in the world. And it spends, China now spends about 2.2% of GDP on R&D, above the average for the European Union countries, which is pretty remarkable. Well, you can argue if the return on investment or productivity is high or not, but needless to say, it certainly shows how commitment China is to the R&D. So, and this also leads to the quick development in terms of 5G, AI, e-car, or any other field that is becoming more and more strategically important for any country in the world. Well, China has made significant progress. I guess it's not a news that some challenges in front of China. Well, I think still need to undertake additional reform to address the existing shortfalls in national innovation systems and ensure that innovation enhance the productivity. Just a couple of examples. For example, quality versus quantity. Even in the semiconductor industry, outside of China, there's a lot of M&A or merger and acquisition is happening. The latest one in my industry is ADI acquired the Maxim, or the Japanese company acquired another company just last week. Well, within the China, if you check out how many new startups in the semiconductor industry, it's amazing. According to different, I would say, numbers, I've seen numbers from 2,000 all the way to 20,000. And with this kind of scale or number of companies, you could imagine the ROI or the risk of losing those money is huge. So another one needs to do a better job is the IP protection. It's not only to the benefit of other companies or the countries who are exporting technologies to China, but also is to China's own benefit to have a better IP protection. I can share with you one story of a company I was familiar with. This company, who is in the semiconductor field, has invested like $3 million to come out a new technology. And within 3 months after it released to the market, the copycat is in the market and jeopardized the margin. And when I talked to the head of this company, he said, I would never invest so much money on technologies that can be easily copied. So the point I try to highlight here is, even for the companies who are trying to innovate within China, without IP protection, it hurts itself. So the good news is, I think it's a common view now that IP protection is important, just a matter of when the legislative measures and also, more importantly, enforcement of IP protection will be in place. And
we will go to the Q&A session. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you wrap up? Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Lastly, I'd like to touch very briefly about U.S.-China trade. As mentioned, I don't think decoupling is a solution. Taking a semiconductor area, for example, Semiconductor is America's 5th largest export. More than 80% of the sales of the semiconductor industry in the US comes from global market, especially to China. If we decouple, first, the market will be much smaller. And as a US company, we need the money to put into the R&D so as to keep the leadership in the R&D. So long story short, China is a major player in the global economy and the top customers for US technology companies, including in the semiconductor industry. And I just hope with the smart minds on both sides, we'll be able to find a way to solve the problem and keep moving forward. Like a Chinese word saying, 危机, when the crisis presents, it brings opportunity. I just hope, and I'm optimistic, we'll be able to solve some problems and keep moving along the way so that both sides can get benefit from the business and the trade. With that, I will pass it back to Yawei. Thank you.
Thanks, Bing. I think that's a wonderful comparison, how you assess the advantages and disadvantages of the two countries. I would hope members of Congress will invite you to testify in Congress. That probably will reduce their anxiety and nervousness about China catching up and overtaking. As our audience, right now we still have 170 online. We have actually reached the end of the webinar, but I would like to go one round of questions with each of the four speakers. And Julian, you can decide whether I have missed some of the more important questions and whether to go for the second round. So for Frank,
I think we need
your colleague.
Go ahead. Yeah, we'll try to, initially we start the QA 9:30, but we extended.
I've combined questions for each of them, right. And you decide if I missed anything. Okay. So for Frank, I think your colleague, Professor John McIntyre, proposed a question. So basically to combine all the questions, my question to you and also from the audience, what is the China strategy of Georgia Tech? That means, how are you going to manage the large number of faculty and the researchers, who are ethnically Chinese, in regard to the so-called China Initiative? Secondly, how are you going to manage your campus in Shenzhen? And thirdly, will you admit more Chinese undergrad? Basically a comprehensive Georgia Tech China strategy. Go ahead.
So I'll try to be brief, but yeah, great questions. I think generally speaking, Georgia Tech is very proud of its engagement with China. We're very proud of our campus in Shenzhen, and we intend to continue our engagement in China and hopefully even expand it. On those 3 points, I'll try to be brief. For the campus, we're offering master's programs. We have some plans to expand those. We send undergraduate students there on short-term study abroad programs, and it's turned out to be a very valuable experience. I think, and this is one of the things, thank you to everyone who raised these questions. I probably should have mentioned more, but, emphasizing the importance of engagement and learning from one another. I think that's a foundation of a successful relationship, and it's going to be necessary if we're going to move U.S.-China relations forward. In terms of faculty and all of those types of issues that have been in the news, I think the key is just to have good best practice disclosure and other protocols in place at Georgia Tech, and we're certainly very diligent about that and always trying to make sure that we are attentive to the rules and making sure that we have good compliance regimes in place. Thirdly, in terms of recruiting students, we have a lot of very, very talented Chinese students here. We hope to get more. We believe that bringing together talented people who want to learn and who have open minds is the best way of getting better. You don't learn new things from people who already think the way you do. That is the dialectic of education, and we believe very strongly in it.
Thanks, Frank. That's a very quick but very detailed description of the Tech China strategy. I hope all the best, and Georgia Tech will play a very important role in this area. So the second round of questions will go to Bing. There are three parts to the question. Number one is, can you quickly comment on Chinese Americans' contribution in the area of high-tech innovation?
Okay.
Second, just three questions in a row, just make it short. Second is how U.S. government and political decisions impacted, for example, Texas Instrument, your decision regarding your business, in Greater China. And lastly, what's your prediction of the Huawei dilemma? Will that, U.S. continue to block Huawei from doing business here as well as with allies in the U.S., or that restriction may loosen up? Go ahead.
Yahweh, I now really understand why you say you are my good friend. You gave me the toughest questions, all three of them. So, except for the first one. First one, I would say it's obvious to me that many immigrants have done a fantastic job in terms of contributing to the U.S. high-tech development. Historically, back to 1950s all the way to now, you see that thousands of them, or if not millions of them, working in the different tech field. I would say that's not only the comment for Chinese, but also other immigrants. And I think one thing the U.S. has been doing a very good job is to attract and retain the brightest the minds in the world. And if you go to taking a IC industry or semiconductor industry, for example, we say that's an IC integrated circuit industry. The IC means Indian and Chinese. I think that's overly jokingly saying this, but certainly it's true. If you go to the many companies, a lot of people are locally grown up engineers, but also a lot of immigrants, Chinese including me myself and many of my peers. So I think immigrants have been, especially those well-educated people, have made a huge contribution to the innovation in the United States. Historic data shows that, and also what's happening now. So second to your question is geopolitical risks or political impacts on the company decision-making. The good news is I have retired the last day of last year. So I'm not working for TI anymore. So I cannot speak for TI. But in general, I think in the business, and also it has a lot of potential to do even better. This is the reason why, taking TI, for example, TI has invested a lot of resources in China to serve the customers in China. That ranging from sales marketing, sales technical support, to R&D, and also manufacturing capability. And in the past 20 years, personally, and many of my colleagues, both here in the States and also people in China, have been working with many companies and have witnessed their growth. They are becoming somebody in the industry from nowhere. Huawei was among one of them. I guess if you go to Huawei today, you talk to many people, all of them, or majority of them, will agree that it's because of they are open to the world, including the US, that they have learned and gradually becoming a much stronger company in the world. So I would say, and that trend is still going. Of course, there's many other risks. I think when you turn on the TV, when you talk to the people, there are many risks, there are many challenges, but nevertheless, it's a business opportunity for companies in the US and vice versa. Meaning US is also a very good market for Chinese companies. For example, if you go to the Amazon, we all know during the COVID, the e-business or online purchasing has been jumped up by 30-40%. If you check out of those who contribute to the growth, majority of that, I got a data sometime like a 60 or 70% jumping are coming from manufacturers in China. So I think it's a mutual benefit, the business relationship. Lastly, back to Huawei. Since I have retired from TI, I can share my personal view. Huawei is the leader in high-tech field in China in terms of innovation, in terms of ethics standard, and in terms of aggressiveness with certain challenges. And as for how to work with Huawei or how it evolves, that is beyond my field. But nevertheless, I wish as a customer of US company, I wish and I hope that both sides will be able to find a solution so that we can keep the business relationship going well, or we also take care of the fundamental concerns both sides may have. So back to you, Yawen.
Thanks. Carl, a couple of questions for you. Number one, you talk about the narrative about China, that is China taking American jobs away. So the question is, how do we combat that narrative? What does it take to change the story about, China is actually taking American jobs, and that ironically produced, President Trump. Second question is, do other international businesses have advantage over US businesses, or US actually is in a better position in the China market? What's the relative advantage of the American businesses in China? Thirdly, as an NGO, what does subnational organization, what role does it play in sustaining the relationship? Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, sure. Great questions. I think as far as changing the narrative, I think we do need just more education and awareness. I think it's seminars, webinars like this one, to explain to the American people and to American decision makers exactly what is the structure of American business operating in China. I mean, I think there's a lot of outdated ideas and frankly ignorance, and it's on both sides of the aisle. I mean, if there are really two people through the last election cycle, there were really only two people that really were promoting that kind of narrative that pulling American businesses out of China and bringing them back to the U.S. It would somehow create American jobs. And those two people were on opposite sides of the aisle. It was Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. They both sort of promoted this idea that it was an either-or choice, that American businesses that are operating in China shouldn't be doing that because they should be investing in the U.S. as well instead. But it's not an either-or choice. So I think there's got to be a lot more dialogue and understanding in the United States in terms of how these businesses actually operate. You asked about competitiveness of the U.S. Yeah, Brand America, I think we do have outstanding products and services and technology, but I think the trade war has demonstrated to us that it's good, but it's not unique. I've had many conversations with, and this links to the third part of the question, is our dialogue at the subnational level. And we've had conversations with the people at provincial and municipal level that literally bring me the trade figures and say, look, here's what we used to buy from the United States after the trade war. Here's the relative share that went to Japan, to Korea, and to Europe instead of going to the U.S. So no, the trade war was damaging to Americans, to American businesses here, especially in chemicals, automotive, really across the board. There are other advanced economies that do provide equivalent products, and this comes back to how the Biden administration is going to approach this in a multilateral way, because that has to be the way it is. Otherwise, you're trying to fill up a leaky bucket. You'll just force China to shift purchases to these other economies. Having said that, I would say there's a lot of concern, especially as the rhetoric has been so sharp, that will this lead to a boycott of American products or retaliation against American products? And I'd say that our brand over here is quite strong among the Chinese people. They like our brands, they like our products, they like working for our companies. So we have a strong brand. It's not, and especially relative to, if you look at some of the geopolitical issues that have happened between Japan and China and Korea and China and how that's impacted those brands, you'll see that the American brands are actually stronger, more robust, and sort of survives the geopolitics, if you will, to a point. That reservoir of goodwill, it's not unlimited. So I think we need to be careful. And just briefly, I would say the dialogue at the subnational level is very different in tone from the way it is between Washington, D.C. and Beijing, and that's a good thing. I think it reflects the diversity of views. I think just like there's a diversity of views in the United States regarding China, there's a diversity of views in China regarding the United States. But at the subnational level, it's very much business. The focus is on business, investment, and job creation, and so we still find ourselves most welcome. It's a challenging environment, as I mentioned before, in terms of competitiveness and speed with which things move here, but it is a welcoming environment.
Thanks, Scott. Since you are from World Trade Center Association, that's why I make you the wrap-up speaker. So 3 questions. Number 1, do you think China will continue to honor for phase 1 trade agreement between the 2 countries? Number 2, when will the second phase negotiations start, or do you think there will ever be a second phase? And lastly, do you think US and China can work together at World Trade Organization? That's a huge question. So go ahead, Scott. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Well, thank you for making me the wrap-up speaker. And well, the first question, whether China will honor phase 1. Well, we have all the commitment. It's probably a little bit too early to tell. The phase 1 covers 2 years. Right now, it's basically the end of year 1. But it doesn't seem to me that China determined to meet the target. So that's what my taking. I personally am optimistic. I think the progress was made and the momentum was good. If you're looking at the numbers of the later year of last year. And the second thing is about phase 2 negotiation, which I personally I'm hopeful. I think it make a lot of sense. But it's hard to say to determine the time frame, because the Biden administration needs to take evaluation, and also they probably need to look at how China perform under the phase 1. So it's and also Biden administration probably needs to think about how other trade partners, the EU and some of their U.S. allies. In Asia Pacific, how he can coordinate trade policy with them. So it's a question mark. But I do hope that we can start that sooner than late, because the phase 1 is going to expire 1 year from now, and then take time to get agreement. Question 3, whether or not can China and the U.S. work under WTO? Well, we are all aware there is a lot of dispute on that, and some of them are quite confrontational. And it's all, I believe it will be about how U.S. see it wanted in terms of approach to China. How much we wanted to change China, and how much we wanted to get from this relationship. At the same time, for China, I think probably China needs to think more as a contributor to this international trade regime, and then as a beneficial from this international trade regime, because China has developed to the extent that it should take more responsibility. And if both sides can do that, then I do believe we can see some improvement in terms of this working relationship under WTO.
Thanks, Scott. So Julian, I yield the floor to you now. So you're in charge.
Oh, okay, thank you. I would say because we have some delays. We reserve half hour for the QA. So we will, we have to, I think then tomorrow most people go back to work, right? We end on around in 5 minutes. So there's more than 10 questions. I post my email there. So if you are still want to follow up, send your question to my email. Then I will only maybe just give one question. That's the comma, just at least I sample one question. Then I will conclude. So the questions both Kurt and Frank stated that the U.S. has to accept China on its own terms, but to cooperate, do business together and conduct joint research, there has to be common rules and stance. Does China follow the world's role and stance sufficiently? If not, what can U.S. do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I think we need to accept China on its own terms. I think we need to be realistic about, what is possible in terms of changing things in China that the United States would like to change, whether it's, trade policy or human rights or whatever it might be. So I think it's being realistic. But again, I do think instead of changing China, it's steering China. And we have a rules-based world order that exists and that, despite concerns about it, despite attacks upon it, has served the world pretty well for the past, since the post-World War II era. And so I think that is the rules-based world order that needs to change to accommodate China. But China needs, we need to, I think, from a U.S. policy point of view, we need to, steer China into that rules-based world order, into a place, again, where we can peacefully coexist, recognizing that we are never either going to be ideally what we would wish the other to be.
All right, thank you. Kurt, what are your comments on that question?
Sure, I'll just add a quick comment about it. And I was reading some of the questions, which are excellent. I wish we had more time to get into them in more depth. But I guess one of the comments was, the world order has worked so well for the United States. Why shouldn't China now be able to create rules? And I think that's a fair point. But I think I would push back on that in the sense that, well, wait, China has benefited an awful lot from its participation in a global trading system as well. In other words, look at China's history just from the economics point of view. Between 1950 and the mid 1970s, China played things a certain way. After the 70s, after Deng Xiaoping opened China to trade and then joined WTO later, how's that worked out for China? I would say pretty darn well. It's worked for the United States too, but both sides have benefited. And to Frank's point, I think China should think more about trying to fit in to a global trading system. And my point is just that it's going to be really difficult to force our system on China, but it's more realistic to say if China wants to participate in global trade, then they have to abide by a certain set of rules. So that's basically where I'm coming from. But others have tried to sort of quote unquote change China, and I would say that throughout history, going back thousands of years, the people that have tried to change China have themselves been changed. And I think that's what we actually need to be guarding against. And we talked a bit about education and these kinds of things. The extent to which China wants to alter the way we do things in our own country. I think we need to push back on that. And we talked about our values, things like our open education system, academic freedom, freedom of speech on our campuses. The extent to which China tries to alter that, we need to push back hard, because I would strongly agree with I think Scott and Bing pointing out, innovation is the key, education is the key to America's strength, and so we need to defend that very vigorously.
All right, thank you, Kurt. It's 10 o'clock, and I put my information there. So anywhere else, if you have questions, send to my email. Then I forward to the panelists, whichever you have a question with, and we try to do our best. Again, thank you all for attending this wonderful event, Chinese New Year annual event. And on behalf of World Trade Center Atlanta, and also thank you our co-hosting organization, the Carter Center China Research Center. Special thanks for our and also our co-hosting organization, Dallas Force ACP Foundation. Special thanks to our sponsors, Royal Trust Bank and Georgia Tech Center for International Business Education and Research. Also, I would like to thank you for those people help put all this thing together, like Dr. Penny Prime, even an introduction to Frank, and Mark Pearson introduction to Kerr, and also Dallas ACP introduction of Bin Xie. And thank you for our audience and all our panelists. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank you,
all.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.